When people talk about the deadliest gunslingers of the Old West, names like Billy the Kid and Jesse James usually steal the spotlight. But there's one name that struck even more terror into the hearts of frontier towns: Bill Longley. Cold-blooded, unpredictable, and quick on the draw. Longley wasn't just a killer, he was a walking legend of fear. Some say he gunned down men just for looking at him the wrong way. Others claim his body count rivaled entire outlaw gangs. But how much of it is truth, and how much is twisted Old West lore?
William Preston Longley, better known as Wild Bill Longley, was a figure of considerable notoriety in the American Old West. Known for his sharp reflexes, fiery personality, and unpredictable behavior, Longley earned a reputation as one of the most formidable gunmen of his time. Born on October 6, 1851, near Mill Creek in Austin County, Texas, he was the sixth of 10 children in the household of Campbell and Sarah Longley. When he was just 2 years old, the family relocated to a farm near Old Evergreen in what is now Lincoln Lee County, Texas. It was in this rural environment that Longley spent much of his early life, becoming familiar with firearms from a young age, a common skill in frontier communities. His education was typical for boys living in remote areas during that era: basic literacy and arithmetic, with much of his time spent helping on the farm. By the time the Civil War ended in 1865, Longley was approaching adulthood. He stood 6 feet tall, had a slender build, and was known for his jet black hair. In the years that followed the war, Texas underwent major changes. The Reconstruction Acts of 1867 placed the state under military authority, with federal troops often serving as both peacekeepers and enforcers of new laws. This period was marked by social and political tension, particularly among those who resented federal oversight. It was during this transformative and unsettled time that Longley left school and began to drift into a less structured lifestyle. Like many young men of his generation, he gravitated toward frontier towns and found companionship among others, living on the edges of conventional society. His involvement in drinking and aimless travel reflected a broader restlessness common among youth growing up during Reconstruction, a time when old social orders had collapsed and new ones were slow to take hold. In Texas, by 1867, the Longley family was living just a mile from the Camino Real, an old Spanish roadway that connected San Antonio to Nacogdoches, serving as a well-traveled route through central Texas. In December 1868, 3 formerly enslaved men, Green Evans, Pryor Evans, and another identified only as Ned, passed through the community of Evergreen. Their purpose appeared to be a visit to friends located farther south. During their journey, the men encountered Bill Longley and a couple of his companions. According to later accounts, Longley and the others confronted the travelers and directed them into a nearby dry creek bed. The situation escalated when Green Evans attempted to leave, prompting Longley to fire multiple shots. Evans did not survive the encounter. Afterward, Longley and his companions searched through Evans' belongings. Pryor, Evans, and Ned were able to ride away without further incident. Though Longley was ultimately held responsible for the death, he would later claim that others also fired their weapons and that he should not bear the blame alone. This event stands out in Longley's early history because of his apparent reluctance, at least later in life, to fully accept responsibility. In contrast to other events he described with bravado, his account of this particular episode suggests some discomfort or an attempt to shift blame. Some accounts allege that Green Evans may have been affiliated with the Texas State Police. However, this detail remains uncertain, as the Texas State Police were not formally established until 1870, 2 years after the incident took place. If Evans was indeed involved with law enforcement, it would not have been through that specific organization at the time of the encounter. After leaving his family's farm, Bill Longley spent time drifting across various parts of Texas. During this period, he often found himself in saloons, where he became acquainted with professional gambler Phil Coe. a figure who would later become known for his association with Wild Bill Hickok. By 1869, Longley had partnered with his brother-in-law, John Wilson. The two began traveling through southern Texas and became involved in a series of unlawful activities that targeted local settlers. Among these incidents was the killing of a freedman named Paul Bryce in Bastrop County. Following the encounter, Bryce's horses were taken. Reports from the time also suggest that a freed woman in Evergreen lost her life under similar circumstances involving the pair. These actions eventually drew the attention of federal authorities. In March 1870, during the Reconstruction era, when Texas was still under Union military oversight, a reward of $1,000 was issued for the capture of Longley and Wilson, a significant sum for the time, reflecting the seriousness with which their crimes were regarded. Longley later recounted that Wilson was killed by outlaws in Brazos County in 1870. However, historical records conflict with this version of events. Alternative sources indicate that John Wilson may have actually died 4 years later, in 1874, in Falls County, Texas. This discrepancy highlights how some details of Longley's life and stories may have been altered or exaggerated over time, either by Longley himself or through secondhand accounts. U.S. Cavalry Career. In an effort to avoid mounting legal trouble in Texas, Bill Longley headed north. By May 1870, he had joined a group of gold seekers departing from Cheyenne, Wyoming, in search of fortune in the Black Hills of what is now South Dakota. At that time, however, the region was protected under a treaty with the Sioux Nation, which prohibited non-native mining activity. When the expedition was discovered by a unit of the U.S. Cavalry, it was quickly disbanded to avoid further conflict or legal consequences. Shortly afterward, on June 22, 1870, Longley enlisted in the U.S. Army. He joined Company B of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment under a 5-year contract and was stationed at Camp Stambaugh in Wyoming Territory. However, the discipline and routine of military life did not suit him. Within 2 weeks, he left his post without permission. Longley was soon located and brought back to face a military trial. He was sentenced to a period of hard labor, which involved being confined with restraints at the camp. Though his sentence called for 2 years of labor, he was released after serving just 4 months and returned to active duty. Despite his difficulties adjusting to military expectations, Longley's skill with firearms did not go unnoticed. He was frequently assigned to hunting parties that helped supply the post with fresh game, an essential task for remote military outposts during that era. Nevertheless, his dissatisfaction with Army life persisted. In May 1872, Longley deserted for a second time, marking another turning point in his turbulent journey through post-Civil War frontier life. Return to Texas and further. Little is known about Bill Longley's whereabouts during the latter part of 1872. However, by February 1873, he had made his way back to Texas. Not long after his return, he was accused in connection with the death of a freedman in Bastrop County, an allegation that once again placed him in the crosshairs of local authorities. Following this accusation, Longley sought refuge with his family in Bell County, where his father had settled. But even this attempt at returning to familiar surroundings offered little protection from the law. During the summer of 1873, Sheriff J.J. Finney of Mason County arrested Longley and transported him to Austin, where he hoped to claim a federal reward offered for Longley's previous offenses. However, when state officials failed to honor the payment, Finney ultimately released him. Some accounts suggest that Longley's release may have been facilitated by his uncle, Alexander Preston Longley, who had traveled from California, possibly offering compensation in exchange for Bill's freedom. 2 years later, on March 31st, 1875, tragedy struck closer to home. Longley took the life of Wilson Anderson, a boyhood friend from his early days in Evergreen. This act was reportedly prompted by a long-standing family grievance. According to some sources, another of Longley's uncles, Caleb B. Longley, believed Anderson was responsible for the earlier death of his own son, Kyle. He allegedly urged Bill to take matters into his own hands. Afterward, Longley fled north, accompanied by his brother James Stockton Longley. Though James was arrested and stood trial for involvement in Anderson's death, he was later acquitted. In the wake of these events, a fresh reward was issued for Bill Longley's capture, setting the stage for a long pursuit by both local lawmen and federal authorities. As law enforcement pressure mounted, Bill Longley continued to move from town to town across Texas, often adopting false names in an effort to avoid capture. He briefly took up work on a cotton farm, attempting to lay low. However, in November 1875, Longley was once again on the run following the death of George Thomas, a hunting companion. The two had reportedly been involved in a heated argument and physical altercation, which ended fatally. In January 1876, Longley was involved in another deadly encounter in Uvalde County, this time targeting Lou Schroyer, an associate with a similarly troubled background. What began as an attempted ambush turned into an armed standoff. Schroyer managed to shoot Longley's horse, but Longley ultimately prevailed in the confrontation. Notably, this was the only documented instance in Longley's life where someone he targeted fought back. After fleeing the scene, Longley made his way to East Texas and secured work as a sharecropper under the employ of a local preacher named William R. Lay. For a short time, he appeared to be settling into a more stable routine. That peace, however, was short-lived. Longley found himself in a personal rivalry with Lay's nephew, both men seeking the attention of the same young woman. Tensions flared, and Longley allegedly assaulted his romantic competitor. The incident led to Longley being jailed, though he soon escaped. He later blamed Reverend Lay for his incarceration. On June 13, 1876, Longley returned to the preacher's farm. There he confronted Lay, who was tending to his daily chores. Tragically, this confrontation ended in the preacher's death. Lay is believed to have been the final person killed by Longley. Following this event, Longley may have traveled to Grayson County, where two of his acquaintances, Jim and Dick Sanders, were in prison. Longley reportedly helped them escape and, during the incident, disarmed Deputy Matt Shelton, who attempted to intervene. Longley fled east to Louisiana. Nearly a year later, Deputy Shelton confirmed that he had, in fact, encountered Longley during the jailbreak, lending credibility to the story of Longley's continued defiance of the law. Capture and execution. On June 6, 1877, law officers located Bill Longley living under the assumed name Bill Jackson in DeSoto Parish, Louisiana. Nacogdoches County Sheriff Milt Mass, along with two deputies, apprehended him without resistance. He was taken back to Texas to face legal proceedings. In the Lee County Court, Longley stood trial for the death of Wilson Anderson, a former friend from his early years. The court found him guilty, and he was sentenced to capital punishment. Longley pursued an appeal in hopes of overturning the decision, but his request was formally denied in March 1878. On October 11, 1878, the sentence was carried out in Giddings, Texas. The location was not far from Evergreen, the small community where Longley had spent his childhood. Today, Longley is buried in Giddings City Cemetery, where a historical marker recognizes his life and the legacy he left in Texas history. Legend, hoaxes, and tall tales. Though Bill Longley was confirmed to have taken part in 7 fatal encounters, he later claimed responsibility for as many as 32 deaths, most of them, he said, involving African American individuals. However, many of these claims remain unverified, and historians view them with skepticism. Years after Longley's execution, his father, Campbell Longley, publicly challenged the official story. He asserted that his son's hanging had been staged and that Bill had actually escaped punishment. This claim drew attention for decades. To address lingering doubts, researchers confirmed the location of Longley's grave in Giddings, Texas. In 2000, the grave was exhumed and the remains were transferred to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., for scientific analysis. Forensic experts conducted DNA testing and performed a facial reconstruction based on the skull. In June 2001, it was officially announced that the remains were indeed those of Bill Longley, settling the long-standing rumors surrounding his death. Unverified claims. Many stories and legends about Bill Longley have developed over time, but few can be confirmed by records from his lifetime. A significant number of these tales originate from accounts Longley shared himself while he was incarcerated in Giddings in 1877. Some of these narratives are likely exaggerated or untrue, while others might have a basis in fact but lack independent evidence from the period. Longley's tendency to embellish seems partly driven by a wish to match or surpass the notoriety of John Wesley Hardin, another well-known figure of the Old West. Interestingly, Longley reportedly reacted with anger upon learning of his death sentence. In contrast, Hardin, who had been convicted of multiple offenses, received a prison term of 25 years rather than a capital punishment. One of the most clearly disproven tales Longley shared was about being captured and lynched in 1869 alongside a member of Cullen Baker's outlaw group. According to Longley, he survived after a fortunate shot cut the rope during his hanging and then joined Baker's gang. However, since Baker had already died and his group had disbanded by that time, this story cannot be accurate. There is no contemporary evidence supporting claims that Longley was involved in the killing of a black militiaman in Old Evergreen in 1866 after an insult to his father, nor that he shot 8 black individuals in Lexington in 1867 to settle a dispute over a horse race bet. Moreover, Longley would have been only 14 and 15 years old, respectively, during these alleged events. Whether true or not, these stories reflect the deeply ingrained racial attitudes Longley expressed. He himself admitted that he was taught to believe it was true, highlighting the prejudices prevalent in his upbringing and era. Similarly, Longley's claim of killing a trail boss named Rector while traveling to Wyoming in 1870 remains unverified, and its truthfulness uncertain. Weapons of choice. Longley is traditionally believed to have carried a pair of Dance .44 revolvers, which were Texas-made copies modeled after the Colt Dragoon pistols. These firearms were popular in the region during his time. However, for the 2 confirmed killings attributed to him, those of Wilson Anderson and William Lay, Longley used a shotgun. These are the only cases where the specific weapon involved in his actions is clearly documented. In popular culture, Bill Longley features prominently in Louis L'Amour's 1959 novel, The First Fast Draw, which offers a heavily fictionalized portrayal of Cullen Baker's life. He is also a central figure in The Pistolier, a novel by James Carlos Blake, published by Berkeley Books in 1995. In television, Longley was portrayed by actor Douglas Kennedy in a 1954 episode of the Western series Stories of the Century. Later in 1958, Steve McQueen took on the role of Longley in Season 2, Episode 23 of Tales of Wells Fargo. Additionally, Longley was the title character in The Texan, a CBS television series starring Rory Calhoun that aired from 1958 to 1960. This show depicted him as a noble wanderer, offering a more romanticized version of his story. Bill Longley's name still echoes through the legends of the Old West, not just as a deadly gunman, but as a symbol of the brutal and chaotic era that shaped America's frontier. Whether you see him as a ruthless outlaw or a product of his violent times, one thing is clear. Bill Longley was truly one of the most feared men to ever draw a gun in the Old West.
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss the upcoming interesting videos. Thanks for watching.